Hey, what's up everybody? Back with another video from Kiev. Today I thought I'd do a little bit of a different type of video. Actually, this is my second take. Yesterday I did record a video about 45 minutes long. Didn't like it, and stupid me just deleted it instead of editing it, adding to it. So I've already done this once. I'm gonna try to do it again. So I start off here today by saying that this is probably one of the most important videos I've done as far as content-wise. So I'd appreciate if you don't have time to watch the whole video right now to just turn it off and come back when you have enough time to watch it, because there's going to be a lot of information in this video. It's going to be rather dry, but hey, that information often is. So I want to start out talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is me. That's a joke, but I don't talk a lot about myself on my videos, don't talk a lot about my background or anything like that, but I think for purposes of this video, it's important to establish bona fides. So, those of you who don't know me personally, I am a former Army intelligence officer. I spent 21 years in the military, Army, spent my first 7 years as an Apache mechanic or crew chief, and my next 14 years as an intelligence officer. I primarily focused on Russia, Moldova, and Ukraine, Eastern Europe. I was a contractor for the Defense Intelligence Agency for about 6 or 7 years as well, and also focused mainly on the same theater. I am a graduate of Defense Intelligence Agency's Ukrainian Cultural Seminar. I hold a master's degree in strategic intelligence. I hold a master's degree in diplomacy. And in 2019, I moved to Kiev, Ukraine to complete a master's degree in Eastern European Studies at Taras-Shevchenko University. As part of that program, I studied how the government works, how civil society works, had a full semester on nationalism, and I can tell you what Ukraine defines as nationalism isn't how we define it in the States. So I really got to understand, the whole purpose of me moving here was to get to understand the nuances and the cultural aspect of the country that I couldn't get from being abroad. So I got the chance to do that, completed all my courses, completed my state exams, was writing my thesis when the war kicked off, and that really threw a wrench in everything. So originally my thesis was counterintelligence operations to combat Russian hybrid warfare in Donbass, but once Russia left Donbass and crossed over the lines into Ukraine proper, that really blew that out of the water. So my thesis now is on media and propaganda and how it influences the war in Ukraine, both domestically and abroad. I will defend my thesis in June, and at that point I will publish it online and put a link out for any of you who'd like to go online and read it. So it's going to be a huge deep dive into propaganda, media manipulation on information, and to get into the psychological aspects of it, which is something I dealt with in my military career. It used to be known as psychological operations. Now it's known as IO, information operations. It's how you craft narratives to influence populations. I'm seeing these same things being used in the civilian world, excuse me, to craft certain narratives about what's going on in Ukraine. So I wanted to take a chance today to dispel some of the myths, rumors, and flat out lies about what's going on in Ukraine, and just about, historical aspects of Ukraine, etc. So I will try my best not to drop the F-bomb, but things happen. This probably will have some cuss words in it, so I would say it's not safe for work. And like I said, I'll try not to drop the F-bomb, but sometimes as I talk about these things, I get a little emboldened and passionate. Become too passionate and become emboldened. So anyway, so there's quite a few things I want to talk about, and I almost don't know where to start. So I just want to give you the background so I could tell you, so you understand where I'm coming from and my background as it pertains to Russia and Ukraine. I've been studying Russia for about 15 years. I've been studying Ukraine for about 10 years, and I wrote my first white paper on Ukraine for Defense Intelligence Agency back in 2015, less than a year after the Maidan Revolution took place. So this is not new to me. This is not something, I started following after the invasion last year, after the February 2022 invasion. I was living here for 2 years prior to that. So, anyway, sorry, my allergies are killing me right now, and I have this nasal spray and drainage, so pardon me. I've got a cup of coffee. I'm trying to drink, but I probably have to clear my throat a few times. So, recently, a friend of mine posted a video of Tucker Carlson. I will tell you, I am politically conservative. I used to watch Tucker Carlson every day. I would get up here. I would usually get up about 2 or 3 hours after his show aired back in the States, so I'd pull it up on YouTube and watch it. And when he started talking about the Ukraine invasion and the pretext leading up to it, I remember the day he said, the U.S. government's trying to tell you we should root for Ukraine, and why shouldn't we root for Russia? And by the way, I am. That struck me as weird. It's like, wait a minute, what did he just say? And since then, he started going down this rabbit hole of a lot of pro-Russian narratives. Anti-Ukraine, which ended up being anti-U.S. government support to Ukraine. And the only reason I can think he's doing this, well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think one of the aspects is a lot of people right now want to be so anti-Biden administration, they're taking the opposite side, which unfortunately a lot of times has them repeating like Russian propaganda and Kremlin narratives, but they don't understand. They don't understand what's going on over here enough to realize they're repeating Russian propaganda. It got so bad with Tucker that even still when he was on Fox News, RT, Russia Today, and TASS, the state-owned television station in Russia, used to play segments from his show on air. I mean, if Russia is playing segments of his show on air, that's not a good sign. So anyway, a friend of mine posted a video the other day, and it was Tucker Carlson interviewing retired Colonel Douglas McGregor. So Tucker starts out by saying, Western media is lying to you about what's going on in Ukraine. Now, right off the bat, I have to call bullshit, because one of the things that has helped me is the fact that I live outside the U.S., so I still watch U.S. news, but I watch all this other news from around the world, actually, and it's really helped open my eyes, and I don't get, my information's not stovepiped. I don't get it from one or two sources. I get it from a plethora of sources, actually, from all kinds of political aspects from the left, from the right, from dead center. So if I go to St. Sophia Square or St. Michael's Square here, where all the international press hangs out, on any given day, I can see Fox News, CNN, I can see BBC or Sky News out of England, I can see Deutsche Welle out of Germany, France 24, I can see TVP out of Poland. I can see all these different news agencies that some are conservative, some are liberal, from different sides of the political aisles. But Tucker Carlson wants you to know they're all lying to you. Even though they're on the ground here reporting, they're lying to you. And only Tucker Carlson, who has never once had the balls to set foot in Ukraine, is telling you the truth. He's the one telling you the truth, even though he's never been here. Now, mind you, he's been to Hungary twice to interview President Viktor Orban, who's known as Europe's last dictator. And on his last trip, last month, 2 months ago, rumor has it, now this is only a single source, rumor has it he wanted to interview Putin. I've heard some talk shows repeating this, and when I say a single source, the only person this came from was like the assistant director at RT, Russia Today, told this to somebody, and so that's the only place, so I'm starting to hear this repeated. So it's like, okay, you're literally repeating what's coming from Russia Today on our media. So even though he was in Hungary interviewing Orban and supposedly wanted to interview Putin, he still couldn't find the time to come to Ukraine to see what's actually going on. Instead, he talks trash about Ukraine all the time, despite never having been here. So he goes on to say, Western media and the U.S. government's lying to you about what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine's not winning. In fact, it's losing badly. Well, I would say, number one, that's not true. Number two, if you're talking about military campaigns in terms of winning and losing, you don't understand greater military campaigns. It's not a win or lose thing. And I hate to tell everybody this, but there is no pure military solution to the conflict in Ukraine. Even if Ukraine meets all of its goals and pushes Russia all Russians, not back to the 2014 borders, pushes them all the way out of Donbass, out of Crimea. That doesn't stop the war. We see that they're firing missiles from Russia, so just because it goes back to their international borders, recognized borders, doesn't mean the war is going to stop. So there's more things to winning than just the military aspect of it. But like I said, if he's talking about in terms of winning and losing, he doesn't understand greater military campaigns. So I would say, number one, no, that's not true. He goes on to say, so he said the Ukraine is losing badly, and he says, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what he says. I don't want to. I could easily cut this up and make this a nice edited video and do my face over maps, all this crap, but I don't want that. I want to have a real conversation, and sometimes, I get too many thoughts in my head at once. So, so I'll go back to Tucker. So he brings on Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Macgregor starts down the path that Ukraine's losing badly. He says we estimate about 400,000 Ukrainians have been killed. Who in the hell is we? He never says who we is. And I can tell you, I've seen the intelligence agency reports from the US, from Germany, from France, from UK. None of those are even close to 400,000 Ukrainian deaths. And I will tell you, there's actually public laws here in Ukraine that makes it illegal to release those numbers. So they don't release those numbers, even to when they're sharing intel with US agencies or British agencies at the top secret level, they don't release the number of Ukrainian losses. So I'm really curious to know, I really want to know who in the hell we is. And I'd like to know where he got those numbers from, because the only place you will get that number 400,000, and please look this up, the only place you will find that number is in Russian propaganda and on Russian websites. There are some US think tanks out there, like Institute for the Study of War, who I think Washington Post recently quoted. They estimate close to 500,000 for both sides. Now that's killed, wounded, and civilian deaths. So estimated 500,000 for both sides. I can tell you that jives with the numbers that I've seen in the classified intel reports. So I don't get this. McGregor goes on to say, he said that the Russian army was gentle. Yeah, I'm sorry. Does he not realize that the whole world, when this kicked off, saw the videos of what happened in Bucha? Bodies laying in the middle of the street, arms tied behind their back, executed, all the sexual, violence that took place, documented. To call the Russian army gentle, is he freaking insane? All you have to do is read about the rape of Berlin when they left Berlin after the end of World War II to see they're using the same tactics they are now. Russia hasn't changed. He went on to say that Russian soldiers treat Ukrainian POWs fair, therefore Ukraine has no problem surrendering to them. In fact, they're doing it en masse. No, they're not. No, they're not. I can tell you they're not. And two, did he not see the video last year of the Russian soldier taking a box cutter to castrate the Ukrainian POW that circulated online? In fact, 2 or 3 days ago, the UN just determined there were war crimes. Russian soldiers committed war crimes against Ukrainian POWs. The UN just determined that in a trial 2 or 3 days ago. I can put the link up for that in this video. In fact, I will put the link for that in the description of this video. So please, I will try to put as many resources I have that I talk about in this video. I'll try to put them down there. But please, by all means, go out and do your own research as well. It frustrates me when people like Tucker Carlson spread these lies because he has such a large platform, and people take what he says as gospel truth. I have friends of mine that have known me for over 2 decades that know my background, that realize I live here in Ukraine. I studied the country. And it's not just, I didn't just two years ago start Googling stuff like they did. Every time I walk out of my door, I'm in the middle of Ukraine, I see what's going on. I understand how the government works. I understand so much more than most Americans do, simply because I live here and I made it a point to learn this stuff. Yet I've got people telling me what's going on here based off what Tucker Carlson says. And I've asked people, hey, why do you think Tucker Carlson knows anything about Ukraine? And I don't get answers. So it's frustrating for me that something I spent a bulk of my adult life studying professionally and academically, I'm now being called out on it. And my friends are people who I thought were my friends, former work colleagues, calling me effing moron, telling me I'm stupid because I don't go with what Tucker Carlson says. And so this is frustrating because he has such a large platform and he says what people want to hear, so they take it as truth. And as I'll try to correct him in the comments, I get attacked. That's pretty scary because you figure if they're watching Tucker Carlson, they're conservative. So these are conservative. A lot of people who were anti-vax who are now saying, oh, the government lied to us about that. We'll never fall for that again. But yet you're turning around now and you're falling for lies that Tucker Carlson's saying. It's insane to me. And it's insane to me that people who know my background are arguing with me about what's going on here, what I see every day. When they have no background in this, they have no experience in it, no education. It's just something they started Googling a month and a half ago. So we'll keep moving on. Some of the other things that Tucker said was Zelensky's a dictator. He canceled the elections. He said he canceled the elections next year. We're not going to have the elections. Does that sound like a democracy? Zelensky didn't cancel the elections. It is in the Ukrainian constitution that elections cannot be held during martial law. The Ukrainian government, which is known as the Verkhovna Rada, or just the Rada declared martial law. The Rada has voted twice now to extend martial law. Just like Joe Biden, Zelensky cannot unilaterally alter the constitution. That has to go through the Rada. So that's not Zelensky's call. That's not Zelensky being a dictator. In fact, if you understood how the political system works over here, you were following it, you would realize that Zelensky is currently polling between 80 and 90%. Therefore, if elections were to be held right now, it stands to reason his political party would probably pick up quite a few additional seats in the Rada. So if he was really acting dictatorial, he would be pushing for elections because he would be trying to pick up more seats and get a majority in Congress as well. Some other things that Tucker said. Zelensky outlawed religion. No, he didn't. He outlawed Orthodox religion. No, this is a Orthodox country. Orthodox religion is still mainstream. I think in Kiev we have St. Nicholas Cathedral, maybe, which is a Catholic church, maybe one more Catholic church. Almost from the view of my kitchen here, there's a mosque. There might be one or two more, but all the other churches and cathedrals here are Orthodox. He says he has priests arrested. Zelensky doesn't have priests arrested. Zelensky is not law enforcement. And here's one of these things that really piss me off. When Tucker says something like this, Zelensky has priests arrested, they're one-liners meant to elicit an emotional response from viewers without any further context. And to understand the context of this, you really have to understand about the history and context of what he's talking about, what goes on in Ukraine. And by the way, I'm going to show you this real quick. I have my computer's off. I'm using it to hold up my phone. I have no notes or anything like that. This is everything I'm talking about here comes from 10 years of institutional knowledge plus academic studies. Like I know this stuff like the back of my hand, which makes it extremely frustrating when people argue with me about this when they actually have no clue. So anyway, back to priests get arrested. So yes, some priests have been arrested. Did Zelensky arrest them? No. Zelensky doesn't pick up the phone, call the police, say, hey, arrest these people. 3 days ago, there was a priest arrested in Kherson. He was smuggling in arms and selling them to Russian partisans when SBU, Служба безпеки Ukraine, which is Security Services of Ukraine, when they went in to this church, they found all this stuff on his computer. They found an arms room down in the basement of the church where this guy was storing all these arms he was bringing in and selling them to Russian partisans. So yes, some people like that get arrested. Other priests that have been arrested. This is where you have to understand historical context. So I'm not Orthodox, but as far my understanding of the Orthodox religion, there are patriarchies. So there was the Moscow Patriarchy, the Greek Patriarchy, the Greek Orthodox Church, maybe one or two more, and then above those was the Constantinople Patriarchy in Istanbul, Turkey. It's my understanding Constantinople Patriarchy sat above all the other. And the Ukrainian Orthodox Church used to fall under the Moscow Patriarchy. So in 2014, when Donbass was invaded, relations soured between Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine started pushing for their own patriarchy. So in 2018, the Constantinople Patriarchy granted Ukraine something called autocephaly. They were given their own patriarchy, which was on par with the Moscow Patriarchy. So I forget if it's like, we'll just call it the Kiev. It's either Ukraine or Kiev, just the Kiev Patriarchy. So now you have the Kiev Patriarchy and the Moscow Patriarchy even. One's not subservient to the other anymore. The problem was some of the churches here in Ukraine, some still fell under the Moscow Patriarchy, owned and operated. Some fell under Ukraine Patriarchy. So it caused this split. You see, under the Soviet Union, religion was illegal. The Communist Party was your religion. The state was your God. Putin has been forthcoming about wanting to rebuild the former Soviet empire. However, he was smart enough to realize religion wasn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you can use it to control the people. If you control religion, you can use it as another means to control the people. So, Putin uses the Moscow Church, Orthodox Church, as a wing of the government. Every time he's elected, and by the way, when a president is elected in Russia, they believe he talks directly to God. So the head of the Moscow Church, which is Cyril, I believe is his name, who, by the way, walks around with $80,000 watches on, blesses the president, who's been Putin since 2010, with the exception of a short term of Medvedev. We'll talk about that jackass later. So he blesses him because they want to see that he has the priest's blessing. However, they believe the president talks directly to God. So by doing that, it's showing the head of the church is subservient to the president who talks to God. Therefore, the president controls the church, and they can use this as a propaganda piece to the people, which they've done very successfully. They also are doing that here in Ukraine. So when the war started, a lot of these priests were pushing Russian propaganda. They were acting as agents for FSB because there is a huge connection between the Moscow Church, the Orthodox Church, and FSB, which is basically like the security services of Russia. So it's FSB, GRU. FSB is a civilian security service. GRU is a military intelligence services. So there are a lot of FSB officers who are actually ordained priests as well within the Moscow Church, and they scatter them to the winds and use them to basically promote Russian ideology in the outlying territories. So there was a big split, and a lot of these priests got in trouble for spreading Russian propaganda, giving information back, passing back to FSB agents, things like that. There was even, and in fact, I think this is still a problem. So one of my videos I did 2 years ago when my mom was here was on the Pescalavra, the first century monastery that has the crypts underneath where all the old priests are mummified and wrapped in coffins. So that was leased out by the Moscow church. That lease ended, December 31st, 2022. Ukraine decided not to extend that lease. However, the Russian priest refused to leave, still held service. A bunch of old artifacts went missing, probably ended up back in Russia. And so they eventually had to go in and arrest some of these police. And it was, there were protests out there because some people were still with the Moscow church. Some people were, it's this huge thing. So that's how some priests end up being arrested. Either they were conspiring with, selling arms, that's a bad thing, doesn't matter if you're a priest or not, but being FSB agents or having ties back to Russia's security services, or breaking the wartime Ukraine propaganda laws. You can't just, put out Russian propaganda, pro-Russian propaganda. There's a law here. You can't do it. So Zelensky would say, does that sound like a democracy to you? Same thing with the outlawed opposition parties. Did I talk about that already? What's the first one I did? Outlawed opposition parties. So just like with holding the election, Zelensky couldn't unilaterally outlaw opposition parties. And I've seen this reported wrong in a bunch of Western media because some say Zelensky did it, some say the Zelensky government did it, and a couple of them actually got it right. It was the Security and Defense Services of Ukraine, or Defense and Security Services of Ukraine, I get that backwards. They're the ones that actually outlawed these opposition parties because these opposition parties had ties back to Russian oligarchs and some back to Russian security services. Now, it's very important to understand the political system here is not like in the States. There's not two main parties, arguably 3 or 4. There are over 300 parties registered in Ukraine. And right now in the Rada, about 8 or 9 hold seats. So, and a lot of these parties exist just on paper. And some of these are created and funded by Russian oligarchs who also have ties to Russian security services. So they went in and they outlawed a lot of these parties. The largest party was called, I can never remember the name of this party, but it was ran by the oligarch and bankrolled by the Russian oligarch Medvedchuk. Medvedchuk was later arrested for conspiring with Russia and they end up trading him for some Ukrainian POWs. But those are the political parties that were banned, not just because they were opposition to Zelensky, but they were Russian-connected parties who were Russian-owned and operated or funded, and some who even had ties back to Russian security services. So when Zelensky says, does that sound like a democracy to you? I'm pretty sure if we were in war with China, we wouldn't have, political candidates hopefully bought and paid for by China in our Congress. One of the other lies is he restricted all television stations and took control of them. No, he took control. Zelensky used his emergency orders and put all state-owned television channels under one umbrella because there were Russian-owned and operated channels here who were, once again, showing Russian propaganda. Again, if we were at war with China, we would not have Chinese-owned television playing anti-American government Chinese propaganda. We just wouldn't do it. And so, Tucker's like, does that sound like a democracy? I'm sorry, you cannot compare peacetime in the U.S. with wartime and wartime, law in Ukraine. You can't do it. But it's funny because Tucker wants to use these little emotional arguments all the time. Does that sound like a democracy? Does that sound like a democracy? What's that even supposed to mean? Just because some place is not like the U.S. doesn't mean it's not a democracy. Case in point, in Canada, you can be arrested for intentionally misgendering someone or not calling somebody, not using their proper pronoun. Just like Jordan Peterson was arrested, or not arrested, he was a tenured professor who was fired for not calling a student by their chosen pronoun, instead called her by her name. Does that sound like a democracy? Well, Canada's not known as a dictatorship, it's a democracy. Canada also, unlike the U.S., does not have freedom of speech written in its constitution. Stephen Crowder talks about that all the time. He was born and raised French-Canadian, now a U.S. citizen. He talks about that at length. I lived in Germany for 15 years. Not all at once, pieced together, 15 years. In Germany, you can walk down the street with a beer. You can't do that in the States. Does that sound like a democracy? In Germany, you cannot flip somebody off. If you drive down the road and you flip somebody off, all they have to do is take your license plate, give it to the police, you'll get a ticket in the mail. My ex-psychopath of a girlfriend got drunk one night, called a police officer an asshole, got arrested, got fined 500 euros. You can say, does that sound like a democracy? Well, they don't have freedom of speech like we do. But Germany is not known as a dictatorship, it's known as a democracy. So there's different levels of democracy. Just because it doesn't reflect exactly like we have in the States, it doesn't mean it's not a democracy. Like I said, not only could I walk down the streets of Germany with a beer, I can do that here in Ukraine. I can walk down the streets and not get arrested. You know what else I could do in Germany? Drive down the highway, pull over the side of the road, and go pee on the side of the road as long as I didn't expose myself to traffic. If I did that in the States, I'd be arrested. Does that sound like a democracy? So these are stupid little emotional arguments that Tucker throws out there to get people, one-liners that he can't really put into context, they're just emotional arguments. So we'll get away from Tucker for a while. So back to Colonel McGregor. I really didn't follow McGregor that much. So once I saw this video was 45 minutes long, I believe, 42 minutes. I haven't made it past 17 minutes. Like, it makes me want to vomit in my mouth listening to somebody who wore the uniform for so many years speak as like a Kremlin apologist. Went so far as to blame Ukraine for the war. It wasn't Russia. It wasn't Ukraine that invaded Russia. It's the other way around. I don't care how you spin it. So as I started doing a little bit of research on him, it's pretty easy to find out he's been a Kremlin apologist since this started. So it was 3 days into the war, and he's telling people Ukraine is in 48 to 72 hours of giving up. He did his assessment in April last year, June. Basically, every one of his assessments has been wrong, and he's still saying the same thing. Ukraine's about to fall apart. They're at the end. Russia's getting ready to take over. He's never been right. And as I go back and I start looking at some of the historical context, some of his statements, it was funny. One of the things I saw was Trey Gowdy interviewed him on Fox last year. He interviewed him, and then right after that, I forget her name. Is it Janice Griffin or Janet Griffin? She's the wartime correspondent, short, kind of a gray, pepperish pixie haircut. Highly revered war correspondent. She came on right after that, and Trey Gowdy asked her a question, and she said, "Before I say that, I feel like I have to correct some things that he said, that Colonel McGregor said." And she says, "But he said so many things that were wrong, I'm not sure 10 minutes is enough time." So that's pretty bad. And then the first interview Tucker did with him last year, same type thing. And I think she was the same person that was on there. And, he talked, and then she went through and just discredited everything he said. And then Tucker turns and looks at the camera and says, Colonel McGregor, ladies and gentlemen, a man you can trust. Like, he just dismissed everything she said, even though she just punched holes in this guy's story. So I'm not sure why Colonel McGregor's doing that. I'm not sure why Tucker's doing that. It's really frustrating to see. I'm not sure why they're pushing this narrative, this pro-Russian narrative. I don't know if they have just a base, like Tucker has a base he's trying to speak to, or if it's for political motivations. I don't really understand what this is. So we'll go ahead and we'll move on. We'll move on to some news. 2 or 3 days ago, I think I was watching MSNBC, and they were talking about Ukraine, and at the end of it, the reporter says, how does she word this? Something to the effect of, there is an American journalist sitting in jail in Ukraine, even as Zelensky is here begging for more money. Well, I hadn't heard about this, so I looked this guy up, and his name was like Gonzalo Lira, something like this. He is a dual American and Brazilian citizen. So I never heard about this guy. What are they talking about? There's an American journalist over here in jail. So I get reading this guy's background. When he was in the States, he was known as a red pill dating coach. I guess he used to give online misogynistic relationship advice to people. Ended up moving over to Kherson. I forget if it was 2016 or 2019, and started doing these YouTube videos. Just another jackass of the YouTube video. No, the irony is not lost on me. So he starts doing these kind of pro-Russian videos, and then when the war kicks off in 2022, he starts pushing Russian propaganda. Starts following American journalists around, giving their location over to Russian partisans, and feeding all this information back. So last week, I have to go find the date on this. It's been longer than a week. It's been a couple months. SBU went in and arrested this guy. Arrested him, took him in, went through his house, found a bunch of stuff, let this guy go. He went right back to doing what he was. And so they ended up arresting him again because he broke the wartime propaganda laws. And now supposedly they have a treasure trove of information that he was collecting and sending back to the Russians. So this guy wasn't a reporter. He's just some jackass that came over here and was trying to do the online personality thing. Yet we have a mainstream media in the States saying an American journalist was in jail. That was completely dishonest. So that's frustrating when we have, news agencies that are supposed to be reporting and they're telling lies to the American people. So I'm going to do a video soon on funding to Ukraine And so I don't want to get a lot into the funding, and I'll probably have to end up repeating some stuff, but I think some of that stuff's important as well. The numbers, as far as amount of aid the U.S. has given Ukraine, are so skewed. It's insane if you really look at it. And what's really crazy is all this is public information. Anybody can go out there and look at this information, but most people just either repeat what a politician or a reporter says. They don't look into it. The amounts of money given to Ukraine are nowhere near what they're telling you. I will tell you, so to understand a little bit how the government works, it operates on fiscal years. It's not January to December. It operates fiscal year. The fiscal year starts October 1st, ends September 30th. So in February 2022, when the invasion kicked off, the U.S. budget was already operating under FY22, fiscal year FY22 budget, which means also under the FY22 NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is where all the funding for Ukraine comes from. It's under the defense bill. So as the budget was already passed and was being used, when Ukraine kicked off, they had to do a supplement to Ukraine last year in 2022. So I did a video on this, but I remember the first supplement they gave Ukraine was $40 billion. And people were just freaking out. Oh, $40 billion. Oh my God, $40 billion. We're sending $40 billion to Ukraine. But if you actually looked into the numbers, out of that $40 billion, $9 billion went directly to the U.S. military to purchase more equipment. $9 billion went to Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allowed the president to draw down existing military stocks and then use that $9 billion to purchase new equipment, new stocks, new munitions. So that's 18 out of the 40. That's almost 50%. That's aiding the U.S. military, the U.S. military is benefiting from. When you got down into the weeds of the numbers, $6 billion went directly to the Ukraine military, $2 billion went to Ukraine for humanitarian support, aid and support. It was either 5 and 3 or 2 and 6, $8 billion total, which is a lot of money, but it's a far cry from 40. Now, a lot of the other money went to different countries around who were to aid with humanitarian assistance because they were taking Ukrainian refugees and all this other stuff. So you can see how numbers are skewed. So this year we have $113 billion, which was in the defense budget for Ukraine. This was passed, NDAA, FY23 NDAA. Anybody can go look at this. The defense budget for 23 was only $500 million more than in 2022. $500 million is a lot of money, but when you're talking about $9 billion, $500 million is not a whole lot of money. I'm telling you this because we didn't pass an extremely larger bill to make sure we had money for Ukraine. The money we're giving to Ukraine comes out of our defense bill already. So when you start looking at the numbers, I'll give you an example. Last year, one of the packages that Biden sent over to Ukraine was $325 million. Out of that $325 million, it included 85 M113 troop transport vehicles. We retired the M113 in the 60s. That means these things were produced, in service, retired, mothballed, put in storage, bought and paid for before I was even born. Yet, that's included in part of the package that we send over there, so you get to add that. And when they add these numbers, they're not off what they cost back in the 60s. It's off what they're valued at today. So how in the hell do you try to tell people equipment that was bought and paid for in the 60s that's been sitting in storage counts against the FY23 budget of stuff we're sending to Ukraine? Even if you want to do that. And by the way, people say, yeah, but the taxpayers paid for it. Yeah, okay, taxpayers paid for it, but long before a lot of us were born, so it doesn't matter. Stuff's sitting in storage. A lot of that stuff has shelf lives. Stinger missile has a 10-year shelf life. You can either use it or you pay the company to have it decommissioned. To decommission one Stinger costs about $10,000. A lot of the 155 rounds and stuff like that, they have to be stored properly in climate controlled environments. You have to store this stuff properly, and a lot of it doesn't have a really long shelf life. So you can use it or pay to have it decommissioned. Everything that we're sending to Ukraine, we're replacing with new stuff. And last year, I think this year it was $868 billion for the defense budget. Let's just say 900 billion to make it easy. So if you take that 900 billion and you want to take, as an example, this $200 million worth of M113s we sent, you don't take it out of the FY23 budget, which even 200 million out of 9 billion is like what, 0.0000005%? No, you would have to take all the budgets, the National Defense Authorization Act, the defense budgets that were passed since those vehicles retired, and add all that number up, and then take the 200 million out of that huge budget, because that's how you would get the real number, like 0 to the exponential 5 at the end. It's such a tiny, you can't say something that was bought and paid for back then comes out of this budget. You have to take all the budget of everything, and the M113s are just an example. The Patriot missile systems that you hear quite a bit about over here were designed in the 80s, first put into circulation in 1984. The HIMARS system, which you definitely heard a lot about, were designed in the 90s. So a lot of this stuff is not new. It's just sitting in storage. It's just part of the problem. And a lot of people say, well, it's the taxpayer argument. Well, as a taxpayer, what new taxes have you been charged? What new taxes have you heard of that have been brought up to help supplement the money going to Ukraine? You haven't, because it's money that comes out of the defense budget. And since when has the average person ever had any say what's in the defense budget? In the 20 years we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, we spent an estimated $8 trillion. I don't remember anybody ever complaining, well, my tax dollars should go for that. Like, when has the average person ever had any say what goes in the defense budget? When do they ever have a say on what equipment and munitions the military purchases for defense? When have and we give out this equipment and stuff, and we use it as if we're in direct involvement, it's hard power. If not, it's part of soft power, it's part of foreign policy. But I see on Facebook, Jim Bob in Tennessee, as a taxpayer, I want to know where every piece of equipment's going. No, you ignorant jackass. You don't get to know that. Number one, Ukraine would be absolutely insane to put that information out publicly, because you would know what units have what, and Russians could very easily target all those units because they don't know what units they know what units are sitting where. Even at the classified level, Ukraine doesn't really tell us where that stuff is going. We know where it is in country, we can track, but we don't know what individual units it's going to. That would be insane to put that out there. So Jim Bob in Tennessee, you don't need to know that. Get over yourself, you smug jackass. Not to mention, I'm sure if you look all the nomenclatures, like, yes, something as a Javelin missile, but it actually has a national stock number and a nomenclature, its real name, you'd probably look at that and be like, I don't know what the hell this is anyway. So the tax argument is frustrating for me because so many people rely on it because it's easy. Some of the other arguments you hear are, why are we giving money to Ukraine when we have homeless veterans? I'm a veteran. We should do everything to help our veterans. Trust me on that. However, if you understand how the tax system works, when the U.S. collects taxes, it spends them in 3 categories: mandatory, discretionary, and emergency. And you would think that military spending would be under mandatory, but it's not. It's under discretionary funding. That funding is not the same as any funding that would go to help veteran services or anything like that. In fact, VA and the India is not included in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. It's 2 different things. I hear the same thing. Why are we sending money to Ukraine when people in Hawaii get $700 a piece? People in Hawaii should get a lot more, but that comes out of the emergency spending. It doesn't come out of discretionary, which funds the NDAA every year. What other crap have I heard? Politicians. So when I talk about the NDAA a lot, you can actually go out to you can just Google FY23 NDAA, and up comes a PDF you can download. You can read all through it. So in the FY23 NDAA, it mandated Inspector Generals for the Department of Defense, Department of State, and USAID, United States Agency for International Development, IGs, will conduct accountability. I forget how it's worded. Basically, they will conduct accountability and oversight for all equipment and funding going into Ukraine, which it has been 60-minute video came out a couple days. I will put this also in the description of the video. 60-minute video came out. Really good. I put it on my Facebook page. Really good piece of investigative journalism. Reporter came over here, did month-long investigation, talked to a bunch of people here in the government, took them into like storage rooms where javelins and stuff were. Like, hey, we have all this on a database. They can punch in a number to this. Certain people in the U.S. government have access to this database. They can punch in the serial number to this javelin. It pops up and tells you where this is. That stuff is being tracked. In addition, the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, I always say her last name wrong. She put out a post not too long ago on her Facebook where she talks about the different oversight accountability reports that she does in concert with inspector generals from like USAID, and then they present these to the U.S. Congress. These things are already going on. So when somebody like Josh Hawley comes out and says, Senator Josh Hawley, and says not one more dime to Ukraine without accountability, there is accountability going on. And just to let you know, I voted for Hawley twice. 2 election cycles ago when he defeated incumbent Claire McCaskill, I voted for him. I voted for him during his re-election. So I don't want this to look like this is a left versus right, us versus them. I look at stuff in Ukraine apolitically. That's one of the benefits I have of living outside the U.S. I'm not inundated with news that is either far left or far right, news channels in the States that are influenced by politics, basically. So when Rand Paul comes out and says, no more money to Ukraine until we create an oversight committee, you don't need to do that. It's redundant because oversight and accountability is already taking place. You want to create a committee that needs to be funded, and you can use that as a slush fund. Either way, stop lying to the people and telling the citizens that there is no accountability. It's bullshit. It's political posturing. What else? I don't know. I'll wrap this up pretty quickly, but the whole point of me telling you this is I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. Both sides are lying to you about what's going on in Ukraine. Why, just like I talked about the defense budgets and all this, and we spend this stuff, and this stuff's coming out of the NDAA. It's not actually coming out of your tax dollars are going to go to the NDAA regardless. But why are you hearing so much about it? It's because it's political season. And like everything else in the States, Ukraine war has been politicized. When the war first started and we saw missiles striking the buildings in Kyiv and we saw bodies laying in the streets, the whole world watched in horror. And everybody wanted to jump in and help. And nobody was talking about money then. That stuff hasn't stopped. It's not like that in Kyiv anymore. But out east, on the flat, the forward line of troops, out of the lines of contact, that stuff is still going on. I watch Russian channels, I watch Ukrainian channels, I watch live video streams from I follow some of the units on Telegram. They live stream out there. That stuff is still going on. So don't let your morals be compromised because you think it costs too much money. This money would be going, even if this money wasn't being sent to Ukraine, it's still going to our defense budget. So this would be just a bunch of crap, additional crap bought and then stuck in storage like it is every year. At least now we're getting rid of the old stuff and we're replacing the new stuff. So what's the point of me telling you all this about, lied to? I've come to the unfortunate realization we now live in a post-truth society. What do I mean by that? I mean we live in a society, and when I say we in society, this video is pretty much directed towards people in the U.S. The truth really doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that matters is how much your voice is amplified. I'll give you an example. Tucker Carlson's a perfect example. Never been to Ukraine, has no background in Ukraine, has no idea what's going on in Ukraine. Yet he says something, he has 44 million followers. Oh, thank you, Tucker, for telling us the truth when nobody else will. No, he's not. Tucker's the person we all need to hear. No, he's not. He's a lying little prick is what he is. How about this? Despite my background, studying Ukraine for all these years, being formally educated, speaking Ukrainian, B1 level, not perfect, and living here. If Kim Kardashian posted something about Ukraine and I came on and said, no, that's not true, who do you think would be believed? Because the truth is irrelevant. The truth is no longer, it's irrelevant nowadays. People look for confirmation bias. There's this little jackass in Florida that runs a radio station, hosts a radio show, Steve Kane radio show, but Steve's old now, so he's not on much. Turns it over to one of his prodigies, Brian Craig. I used to call him this show a lot. Before the war started, afterward, always call in, talking to him about stuff. Then once the war started, I call in, and Brian starts asking me questions about what's going on over here. And he starts telling me, well, this. I'm like, no, that's not true, Brian. Then all of a sudden he starts attacking me personally, and I realize he's trying to push a narrative. He doesn't care about what's going on here. His listening audience listens to him. He's a freaking idiot, by the way. His audience listens to him for confirmation bias. Not because they want to hear the truth, because they want to listen to somebody that's saying what they want to hear. There was another reason I was telling you about this little prick. I remember when the war first started, and this is how bad this guy is. When the war first started, I think 3 days into it, his show is Monday through Friday, 3 hours long. So it's a national syndicated radio show. He also live streams on YouTube during his show. I watched him on YouTube. He did a 3-hour show on Biden orders 50,000 troops to Ukraine, which obviously we all know is a lie. Back then I knew it was a lie. And I'm watching this guy do this show where he's just lying to his audience, and nobody's checking him on it. Nobody says anything. One lady asked him, do you have a source for this? So he posts a link in the YouTube chat. And when I click on the YouTube chat, it takes you to the World Socialist website. A single source reporting from a pro-socialist website is where this guy got this. Now, this guy will tell you every time you listen to his radio, it's the most pro-Donald Trump radio station in the country. He is Mr. MAGA every day. This guy's 52 years old, wears a Trump t-shirt, MAGA hat every day. He's Mr. Conservative, Mr. MAGA, yet he's using a socialist website spreading knowingly false information. Why? Because it allowed him to take shots against Biden. And unfortunately, when people do that, just like when Josh Hawley lies to you, just like when MSNBC lies to you about a reporter over here, Colonel McGregor, Tucker Carlson, when they lie to you, there's no consequences for it. Like, nothing happens to them. What happens to them when they lie? So, if we live in a post-truth society, which we've already seen infiltrate our media, political sphere, our educational institutions, some people are already saying it's gotten into our justice system and our court systems. And if it hasn't really yet, once it does, and you can't tell me if it infiltrates all these other pillars of our society, it's not eventually going to infiltrate the justice system as well. What's that do to the U.S. as a country? Because, the truth shall set you free, right? The truth and honesty and the truth is the one thing that it was a moral fabric of our society. And if you no longer have that, I don't know, that's not a society I want to live in. It's not a society I want to be part of. I'm mostly talking about the U.S. because I really, I haven't lived in Germany in 4 years. I don't like talking about other countries. I've lived here in Ukraine. It's an extremely complicated country, especially when it comes to politics. I understand, I have a pretty good grasp on the politics. I understand the different parties and understand like this, but I don't talk about it because they're difficult. So when I see some jackass YouTuber or, media personality just start talking about the political sphere over here, it's like, wait, I don't even talk about that stuff because it's so difficult. You don't know anything about this stuff, and you're just running your mouth. But they're doing this to influence people. And everything in the States now is done to influence, and everything is pretty much done politically, to the point where I think I commented on that Tucker video, and I said Tucker's a lying shill, a lying Kremlin shill. And the first person came back and commented to me, typical Democrat response. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I'm a 2-time Trump voter. I used to watch Tucker all the time. The thing that sets me apart from people who just latch on to everything Tucker says, I happen to be one of the few Americans who lives in Ukraine, who has studied Ukraine professionally, academically, who lives here, who understands the culture. Therefore, I was able to pick up when Tucker Carlson was lying. When he started lying about Ukraine, I immediately knew they were lies. And then I started thinking, if he's lying to us about that, what else is he lying to us about all these other subjects that I just believed him, but I don't really know these subjects? So what else is he lying to us about? I don't know. Here's a dilemma. Somewhere between, this goes back to I was talking to my mom about this last night. This goes back to the old Uncle Ben from Peter Parker adage that with great power comes great responsibility. These people have these platforms and these voices and are not using them responsibly. How do you balance that against the freedom of speech? I don't know. So I can tell you a year out, I can already see this is heavily influencing the election. The media has tried to spin this as if you're conservative, you're against the war, you're against funding Ukraine, and if you're liberal, you support funding. I am conservative. I fully support funding Ukraine. And when you really look into it, hell, Fox News put a piece yesterday out. GOP explodes over, right now they're trying to pass the budget for next year to avoid a government shutdown. I told you, the government runs on fiscal years. So the 30th of September is the last day of the fiscal year, which means they have to pass something prior to that, even if it's a 30-day or 90-day supplement called a continuing resolution. They have to pass something to avoid government shutdown. The Democrats want funding for Ukraine in there. Some GOP people don't. So I believe it was even Fox News put GOP has a meltdown over Democrats holding up government funding over Ukraine, something like this. But there's only like 3 or 4 GOP members that oppose the funding, really. You look at the first Republican presidential debate that took place last month or 2 months ago. There were 9 candidates on stage, and only one, Vivek Ramaswamy, he's the only one that said he didn't support funding to Ukraine. So once again, we see the media trying to push a narrative that, hey, if you're a Republican, you oppose funding to Ukraine, and if you're liberal, you don't. Media, sorry, you don't get to put the American people in boxes like that. We're not monolithic in our thinking. We contain multitudes. I've been talking about it all night. I voted for Josh Hawley twice, and I agree with all his policies except Ukraine. I don't agree with his policy on Ukraine. I sit there and watched him come out during the press conference the other day. They had just received a classified briefing on Ukraine, and he said he didn't see anything in that briefing that showed any way possible that Ukraine could win. That is bullshit. I'm not 100% sure. I think he sits on the House Intelligence Oversight Committee and the Armed Services Committee, maybe. I don't 100% know his clearance level. But I can tell you that I saw some of the original counteroffensive plans that were drawn up. I was there during the first month and a half of the counteroffensives where they modified some of those plans. Him saying there's no way for Ukraine to win, it's complete bullshit. Oh, that's the other thing Tucker said in his opening, by the way. He says that Ukraine is losing badly to a technologically superior army. Technologically superior. They have T-72 and T-64 tanks on the battlefield. Now, Russians weren't very smart with their naming convention. The T-72s were built in 72, the T-64s were built in 64s, and we've seen a couple of videos, this could be propaganda, of T-55s out there. Don't know. Then Tucker goes on to say they want you to think that the Russian army is so, basically he said dumb or what's the word I'm looking for? Ineffective, that if we went to fight with them, we would win. And he says, but we would not. Excuse me, Tucker. Is this based on your strategic assessment after your esteemed career as an assessments officer in the military or government? Or what are you basing that off of? The hell do you mean we wouldn't win? Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. And look what they've done to the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Crimea. Russia was supposed to have the number 2 military in the world, and they couldn't take Ukraine. According to General Milley, Ukraine has reclaimed 54% of the land that Russia occupied last year. How in the hell are you going to say that Ukraine has been able to, you forget, they tried to take Kiev and got their asses handed to them. When the GALD, the Russian GALD, the Airborne Corps, parachuted into Hostomel Airport, they lost almost 50% of their people. These were the elite Russian fighters. They got their asses kicked by a National Guard unit. And eventually you saw they got pushed out of Kiev. They haven't been in Kiev since last, April? If Russia couldn't even take Ukraine on, how in the hell do you think the U.S. would lose? Are you out of your freaking mind? I don't know what Tucker's purpose is, and I don't know why he's saying the things he is, but I can't say I'd like this to happen to him or that to happen to him because, I don't want to say I'd like to beat his ass because he's a little prick. And I can't really say I wish the government would do something because, that's not, our government doesn't operate like that. You have freedom of speech, but it's bullshit that somebody with his audience is allowed to put out false information like that. Because when he has 44 million followers and most are conservative, and they hear him say there's no way for Ukraine to win, that is swaying a lot of people's decisions when it comes to voting. If there's Tucker said there's no way for us to, there's no way for Ukraine to win. I don't want to keep funding Ukraine. So it's pretty sad that he's able to put that stuff out there. So, okay, this video is an hour long. I'm ranting, I'm raving. It could go on forever. I didn't write. I should have wrote down 2 or 3, 4 or 5 talking points to make sure I did hit everything I want to talk about. But whatever. So, like I said, there's a lot of lies out there. There's a lot of mistruths about what's going on in Ukraine. I didn't even get into the whole Nazi thing because this is so ridiculous. Like I said, I'm going to do a video on funding, something that we don't really talk about. A lot of people. It's election season, so that's a big topic in the States right now. It's a big topic in some of the other countries. Slovakia is getting ready to have an election. And the pro-Russian candidate, who very well could be elected, says he will immediately stop funding to Ukraine. And he's been repeating a lot of Kremlin talking points. That will throw a wrench in a lot of things with the EU and NATO. So there's some things going on right now that are kind of scary. I will tell you what a lot of people, and I'll end on this. A lot of people say, why do we care about Ukraine? There's a few reasons. Number one, I live here, so of course I care about Ukraine. Number two, we did sign the Budapest Memorandum when we got them to give up their nuclear arsenal, that if they were attacked, we would come to their aid. Ironically, that was signed by Britain and Russia, so Russia was a signatory and it violated its signatory. But Medvedev, told you I'd come back to him later. Medvedev is the former president of Russia, former prime minister, and I believe he is the head of Putin's party right now in the Russian Congress, which is known as the Duma. He's already said Poland is up next for denazification. He has also already threatened to nuke. There were 2 members of the Russian Duma. One said nuke Germany, one said France, and I don't remember which one Medvedev said. Either way, they said Poland is next. That's NATO. That's Article 5. When this started, the U.S. stood up a task force. The commander was General Donahue. General Donahue was former Delta commander, former 82nd Airborne Division commander, former 18th Airborne Corps commander. They put him in charge of the task force to oversee U.S.-led international support to Ukraine. It was known as Task Force Dragon. Colonel Donahue was charged with setting the Russian military back 20 years. I say we've done that. Manpower, They're decimated for generations to come. Russia itself, it's going to take a long time to recover. We've estimated they've lost over 50% of their equipment and firepower. So we've done all this without costing a single American life. I have to caveat that because there were a couple of Americans who died fighting for their national legion, but the U.S. does not have boots on ground. It's the other thing Tucker said. Ukraine's running out of people. No, they're not. Manpower is not a problem for Ukraine. There are plenty of people here that can be mobilized. And he said, once Ukraine runs out of people, who do you think is going to fight? We are. It's going to be U.S. boots on ground. No, it's not. Ukraine has never once asked for people. He said, just give us what we need and we'll fight. We didn't see that in Afghanistan. We saw, the president take off. Here, when the U.S. offered Zelensky a ride, he said, I don't need a ride, I need bullets. Ukrainians will fight. It's their land. They've only been free for 32 years from Russian occupation, and they know what life was like under Russian occupation. It is in the U.S. strategic interest to stop Russia in Ukraine so it does not keep going into Poland or some other Western country, invoking Article 5, and then we will then be on our way to World War II. One of the last things I'll leave you with, because since I remember Tucker Carlson, when he was still on Fox, he got on there and he said, Zelensky is on TV virtually every night demanding you send your children to die in Ukraine. I commented on a Facebook page and said, no, what he actually said was, and I quoted verbatim, I said, if we don't stop Russia in Ukraine, it's going to keep going west, and then you will be sending your children to die. He was speaking about NATO, Article 5 being invoked. That's why it's important to stop Russia. In addition to it being a strategic message to China on how the U.S. and NATO respond if it has any acts of aggression towards Taiwan. It acts as a deterrent between Iran and Israel, and it acts as a deterrent between North and South Korea. If the U.S. and NATO and the Western coalition stop now, and Russia is able to go ahead and take over Ukraine, it tells all of those actors, bad actors, all they have to do is wait it out. The Western countries don't have the resolve to counter any aggression. And now we're back to 19th century land grabs again. The UN is established to promote order in a rules-based society. The age of conquest is over. Members of the UN are supposed to abide by the charter. Russia has broken its charter 7 times. And we need to figure out the proper way to respond. I'm trying to think how I want to word this. I, for one, want this over as soon as possible. I want it over. I want Ukraine to rebuild. And I want Russia to be held accountable for what they've done. I was in Bucha last year. I saw the scars on the ground, on the buildings of what happened. The bodies were cleared off the street by the time I got there. I can't even imagine what that looked like. This was done by a country that's supposed to be a world leader. This is done by a country that sits on the UN Security Council that's supposed to promote rules-based order. And if we don't, as a collective society, if we don't hold people accountable for violating that, then we're lost. So, okay, now I'm getting way off the subject of lies and stuff in the media. So, anyway, I want to put this out there. If you have any questions, please type them in. I don't know, I guess. I'll do a video soon on funding and go through how all the numbers are being skewed, and it's insane once you actually get into the numbers that are publicly available that people just ignore. So that's it for now. hour and 10 minutes long. Holy crap, went way too long. So, okay, I'm going to shower and go for a walk. So that's it for now. Put out another video pretty soon. As always, thanks for watching. See you soon.